Bernstein solo on Giant Steps, and that's off Ralph LaLama. He's a tenor player album called Circle Line on Crisscross Records. Great solo. I thought that Giant Steps, I used to think that Giant Steps was impossible to play melodically over, that it was just like a math problem, an exercise, but obviously Peter Bernstein proves that to be wrong, because he plays a really nice melodic solo on that particular solo. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about transcription for a little bit, give you some of my views. Again, I'm keeping the theme with these video lessons is, stuff that I initially thought I needed to look at in my own playing, and stuff that was neglected in my playing in my early years of trying to play jazz, and discoveries and things like that that I've made about certain topics over the years, and hopefully I'm departing some of this experience to newer players in the jazz world, so you don't have to spend 20 years like I have trying to find the right way to go about doing stuff. That's the whole reason I'm doing these video lessons. So I want to talk about transcription for a little bit and give you some of my opinions and tips on transcription. When I first started transcribing was when I was in college for music, and kind of caused me to develop bad habits as far as transcriptions go, because I had transcriptions due for classes in school, and naturally I waited till the last minute most of the time to do these transcriptions. So when I finally sat down to do them, I would just sit there with my guitar and a pen or pencil and paper and transcribe a bar at a time, write it down, transcribe a bar, write it down. So I was writing it down first, and that kind of led to bad habits later. Once I got out of school, I continued to write down the solo first as part of the transcription process. And after seeing several master musicians in clinics and on the internet and stuff like that talk about there's really no reason to write them down, and that they didn't write down their transcriptions that they did, I started to rethink how I was transcribing. So I started not writing them down, and I discovered that it's really beneficial, at least for me personally, to do it that way as opposed to writing it down. So I don't even hardly write them down at all anymore. If I do, it's the very last step in the transcription process. The way I go about transcribing now is, I take a solo that I want to transcribe, and I just first off transcribe 4 bars, 8 bars, whatever I can do at a given practice session, and then I memorize it. Transcribe it first. For guitar players particularly, figure out the best fingering, what I think is the closest to what the person I'm transcribing played, if it's a guitar player that I'm transcribing, or just whatever fingering works best for me. Then memorize it. And then when I come back to the transcription the next day or the next practice session, I have to review those 4 or 8 bars, 12 bars, whatever I did the day before. So that causes me to really ingrain the solo, because I have to kind of relearn it every day, because since I'm not writing it down, I can't just look at the paper and say, oh yeah, that's what it was. I have to say, what was it again? And then I have to figure it out, almost retranscribe it. But the process of doing that over and over and over when you're working through a solo, you keep having to, review up to the point you're at the solo, causes you to really ingrain that solo in your muscle memory and just in your ears and everything. So it's a really good process, even though it's quite tedious. But I highly recommend trying it that way. So I've been doing it like that for, I would say, about 5 years now. I've maybe written out 1 solo, 2 solos in the last year. I haven't even written them down at all. And I think if you are going to write them down, that should be the very last thing you do. You know, if you really want to see what it looks like on paper, you want to see, you know, rhythmically what something looks like written out in the solo, or harmonically you want to see what it looks like, you know, the line over the harmonic progression in the tune. But I haven't, I think I've written down one or two maybe in the last 5 years. I haven't been writing them down at all. Now, of course, when you do that and then you stop working on a solo and then you come back to it, like I did with this Giant Steps. I had done this, you know, a couple years ago, and I came back to it recently, and I kind of had to relearn it. But the process of originally learning it caused me to, you know, play it over and over and over hundreds of times. So it really only took me about 2 or 3 days to relearn it again and get it under my fingers again. It didn't take that long at all. It was still in the muscle memory. I just kind of had to bring it back, you know, to the top of my brain, so to speak. So that's basically my process that I do for transcribing, and I highly recommend at least trying it on a couple of solos and see how it works for you. It's much, like I said, it's much more tedious than just writing it down when you're doing it, and then you have it on paper and you can kind of use the music to help you remember what it was, and you don't have the benefit of that. But I think the process of going over it and over it and over it and over it just helps you ingrain it, you know, in your muscle memory and in your oral memory, and I think it's really good. And then the goal after that is to play it along, get everything transcribed and memorized on your instrument, and then just play it along with the solo over and over and over as much as you want. And I think that's the real key to it. I also highly recommend doing entire solos. I have, you know, a few times wanted to know what was that just particular lick or particular phrase. You know, I wanted to know what they were playing, and just transcribed a lick or a phrase off of a solo, and that's all I transcribed from that particular solo. So that has its place, but I highly recommend doing an entire solo, you know, because you're not only, you know, learning, you know, harmonic stuff, but when you transcribe an entire solo, you're getting the whole story of that person, telling a story over a solo, which I think is a very important skill to develop as a jazz improviser, you know. And when you're playing over that whole solo again and again and again, you're kind of like, you know, my picture in my mind is like when you see a baby walking on their parents' feet, you know, and they're holding their arms and they're walking with them like that. It's kind of like that, you know. Wes Montgomery, or, you know, whoever, Sonny Rollins is, you know, holding you and letting you walk on his feet, and, you know, you're learning how to solo from him because you're playing right along with him, and you get so much more out of it like that than looking at it on paper. I think you're getting the time feel, you know, all the nuances and the phrasing, the swing. It's a really good process to go through, I think. Some tips to the newer guys to jazz that are just starting to transcribe: when you're picking a solo to transcribe, my advice would be, number one, pick something that you really like, a solo that you really like and you really want to learn it, because if it's not something that you're really interested in learning and excited about, you're going to end up giving up on it. I would also suggest to, you know, newer players to jazz to pick something that's easy harmonic, like blues, or a tune that you're really familiar with. If you pick something that's crazy as far as the you know, chords and the tune, you know, that can be discouraging as well. So start off basic. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, someone that's considered a simple player, because there's very complex players out there that play simply, you know, on blues changes or rhythm changes, or a standard that you're very familiar with the changes. Also, for the beginner transcriber, pick a pretty short solo so you don't get discouraged. You know, if it's 10 choruses, it's highly unlikely that you're going to finish the entire solo, and I think that's one of the main goals is to finish the entire solo so you can play it along with that person over and over again, and just learn that, you know, narrative of playing a good jazz solo from start to beginning, you know, and it tells a story, has an arc, beginning, middle, end. You're going to learn that skill along with all the other skills you're developing by just playing along with it over and over and over again. Also want to talk about slowdown software a little bit. I've seen, you know, several masters, musicians in clinics and stuff like that speaking out against the slowdown software, saying that, you know, the old school guys didn't have that. They just had the record and they would have to sit there with the record and bringing the record back over and over and over again. So I use Transcribe, that program, and I find it very useful, mainly not for slowing down, but just for, you know, highlighting a section of a solo and looping it, and it's much easier than rewinding a CD or rewinding something on YouTube when you're trying to transcribe something off YouTube, and, you know, you constantly have to rewind, and you can't get it right back to the place where you want it. And with Transcribe, you can just highlight a section of it and just loop it over and over. So I find that aspect of those software programs very useful. I try not to slow stuff down if I can help it. Of course, there's always a passage, you know, or a section of a solo that I just can't get at tempo. It's double time fast, or, you know, there's something harmonically crazy going on, so I end up using that slowdown software. And also, if a tune is just in general at a fast tempo, like that Giant Step solo, it was at a pretty quick tempo, so when I first started transcribing it, I had the whole thing slowed down, not necessarily to half speed, but at about 85%. And once I learned the solo and had it memorized, I would play along with it and slowly creep up the tempo day by day, you know, 85%, 87, 90%, 93, 96, until I had it at tempo, which, you know, you saw me still make a couple mistakes on it. I still don't have it down perfectly at tempo. So I find the slowdown software, Transcribe, and those other programs useful. I try to keep the actual slowing stuff down to a bare minimum and just use my ears to try to figure stuff out at tempo. But I still, my opinion is that they're very useful programs. I use that one all the time. So that's basically it for my tips on transcription. I heard a lot of guys, big name master musicians, say, you know, pick a solo that is right above your level, you know, so you're growing when you transcribe it. You know, if you pick something too hard, you're going to get discouraged, you're not going to finish it. If you pick something, you know, that's at your level or way too easy, you know, you're not going to really grow from it, you know, unless you're a new guy to jazz and you just need to start anywhere. You know, if you've been transcribing for a while and, you know, trying to improvise and play jazz, you know, keep that in mind when you're picking stuff to transcribe, that it's, you know, a notch or two above what you perceive to be your level of playing, so you're actually making some growth as a musician by transcribing it. And I think that's about it. Keep on working. Happy transcribing.